which is also under the subject of domain name, and the topic name is Internationalized Domain Name IDNs, What's Up and What's Next. And for this session, we will zoom into the topic of IDNs, domain names in local script languages. And for this session, it will be moderated by Ms. Pitinan, the IDN Program Senior Manager of ICANN. And also, for this term, we will also have one of our speakers staying around with us. It is Ms. Manju Chen, the manager of our NIIEPA. And also, we would like to invite Dr. Kenny Huang, the TWNIC Board Chair and APAC Executive Council Chair. And also, Mr. Edmon Chung, the CEO of DotAsia, to join our conversation.
But I would like to move us forward to the IDN topics. So joining with me on the panel today, let me quickly introduce, and then maybe you can also introduce yourself further as well. So on my right, I have Manju Chen, the manager from, let me put the full name, National Information Infrastructure Enterprise Promotion Association. That's a full mouthful. And then we have Edmon, the CEO of DotAsia, and also currently the board member of ICANN. And also we have our Kenny Huang from TWNIC, the board chair of TWNIC. So before we actually go into the topic, I would like to maybe each of you put a very quick word on how did you get involved in IDNs. Yep. So maybe start from you, Manju.
So I learned about IDN, I think around the same time when I learned about ICANN. I thought it's a great idea. I didn't know we can do IDNs before I knew about IDNs. But then I didn't know much about IDN. I just thought, oh, that's nice. But then nowadays, I am the council liaison to the IDN EPDP working group. That's how I learned more about IDNs. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmon.
That's interesting. I never thought that my story would be so similar to yours. I first learned about IDN as I learned about ICANN, although that was a few years earlier, which is back in 1999. So I've been working on IDN since that time, still working on it, and now I guess at the ICANN board, also leading the IDN working group at the board. So very excited, continue to be excited to talk about the topic 20 years on.
Thank you. Kenny.
Okay, thank you. My situation probably very similar to Edmon. I started working on IDN because when we approached to ICANN say IDN is not belong to ICANN. That's why we need to invent the IDN by ourselves, and we're working on something else in the IETF. So I become a co-author of IETF IFC 3743 and become a fundamental guiding principle for CJK IDN administration guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. So let's dive into the topic. With about 30 minutes we have now, we also have two perhaps new things that we would like to introduce to the community so we are aware of it. One is the variant management, and then the second one is the single character TLDs. So I will just give a brief background on the topic, and then we open for the discussion. So for the variant TLD, so I would like to touch very quickly on what is the variant. Basically, variant is something perceived as the same by the community. And generally, there are two types. The same because of the visual of it. So like in the blue, if you have these two words, EPIC on the top one and the EPIC on the below one. Those are visually the same, but behind the scene, one is for Latin script, another one is from Cyrillic script. So in the system, they will recognize it as a different domain names or different TLDs. So those kind of variant has to be defined for the security perspective. Another type of variance is for the usability, which is the orange one. For example, if you have the label Taiwan here, the two labels can be perceived as the same, but one uses the traditional Chinese character, another one uses the simplified Chinese character. This similar to a situation in Arabic script as well. So for this is the type of variant which is relevant to the Chinese community, the variant for the usability. So what news for the next round? Currently the variant TLDs is not currently available for the G space, but it's coming for the next round. The variant TLD will be able to implement, but the few recommendations from the policy needs to be done. First of all, if there are the variants, it has to be assigned to the same applicant. So if like ladies in the orange apply for one TLD, no variant, she will get only one. But if somebody apply for the main TLDs and then also the variant, those two have to go to the same applicant. Moving forward, if there is a two string already in the system, one is the main one, another one is the variant, any registration at the second level for those has to also assign to the same registrant. This is to prevent the confusing issue or the security issues, right? So now we have two domain names. One is the name under the one TLD, another is the same name under the variant TLDs. This has to go to the same registrant. The third part is if in the second level itself also have the variant, then the combination of this will be 4 domain names in total. So these 4 domain names has to go to the same registrant. And then this is the last requirement is, let's say this person has 4 domain names in control. It doesn't have to behave as the same. So for example, the one on the top, Chinese traditional names all together, second dot top, it can be show the content in traditional Chinese altogether. And then if you have the simplified version, it can show in another simplified version. So this is basically what the variant for the next round requirement would be. So for this, let me go to the first question. Back to the current situation, what is this IDN usage, or is there any variants happening already today? So maybe let me start from the user perspective side. Manju, if you can share if there is any usage of IDNs today that you've seen, or you share any experience about that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Pitinan. So like I said, when I learned about ICANN and learned about variant, I thought it's a great idea. But then I guess in a sense it remains as an idea. I've never seen before that or after that in my life and website that is in IDN, especially in Chinese. I've never seen, well, I seen one Chinese domain names website, and it's funny because I saw your example in the previous session where when UA doesn't work, when the universal acceptance doesn't work, when you try to copy paste an IDN address to another browser or either like a chat, it turns out to be this PUNICO kind of domain names, and people will think it's a fraud. And I was going to show you the IDN domains I found in the email you sent to me, and talk about this topic, and I pasted it in my Gmail browser, and it became this PUNICO thing. And I was like, what is going on? And then I had to, scrap it and then type it in Chinese, not from copy paste. So that's still a problem, and really shows how, I guess, in a sense, universal acceptance, due to universal acceptance, I guess it's we don't really see the incentive to use IDN domain names, and that exactly IDN domain names that I was referring. It's actually a hotel in Taiwan. And it's called 鼓山园旅社 .tw. So it's the TW domain names. And that hotel is famous because I don't know if you guys know. If you're not from Taiwan, probably not. But there was a gangster movie several years ago in Taiwan. It's called Manga. And it's a gangster movie that's focused on that area in Taipei. And the hotel is famous for being the set of that movie. So when I saw the domain names of that hotel, I was like, wow, this is very cool. Oh, and the hotel is also very famous. One thing is very cool. If you search online, they do their, I don't know how to say that in English, like 棉被 So blankets and different shapes. It's like origami shapes. So you can be like, please today fold my blankets into a rose. So when you're back to your room, your blankets will be folded into a rose. Or you'll be like, oh, please fold my, my blankets into orange. And then when you're back, it's going to be orange. So that domain name is the only IDN in Chinese domain names that I've ever seen in my life. And I want to try if it still works in Simplified Chinese, because it's a Taiwanese website. It's in traditional Chinese. When I typed in the Simplified Chinese domain, it didn't work. It led to another website that says, oh, it's unresolvable. So that's my only experience with the IDN domains. And with this variant, I guess it's not very successful, but we're here to make it more successful, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Manju. Very interesting example. So let me move on to Edmon, who operates the variant at the second level already for DotAsia. So could you share what is the current practice for now for you?
Yeah, I just want to build off of what Manju is saying. I think one of the key problems with Chinese domain names or internationalized domain names is its acceptability, what we call universal acceptance, but also in the issue of IDN variants. I guess partner in crime with Kenny here, it took more than 10 years just to convince ICANN and policies that simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, there is a variant relationship to that. In the technical standardization, it was determined, which is probably the right consideration, that unlike in English, where the capital A and the small letter A, they're mapped together, right? Doesn't matter however you type your domain in small letters or big letters, they're the same. But technically for Chinese, simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese are different. So what that means is that, you know, if you register one character, you might have to register two, and if you register two characters, you have 4, 3, 8, you know, it's exponentially increases the number of names that you need to register in order to cover everything to make it, you know, not a second-class citizens. And that's why I think in the last 20 years, a very important part of it is that Chinese domain names today are still very much a second-class citizen, and we're trying to make it not so. And the policy processes that took 10 years, and then it took another 10 years to work with the global community to actually put the variant policies in place, because we realized, you know, I think Chinese was the first one that looked at variance issues, but we realized then that other languages also had similar problems. Just like English has capital letters and small letters, other languages also have, you know, variations of particular characters. So that took another 10 years. So this is ICANN time, I guess. 20 years to get through technology and then convince everyone to, and then get the policies in place. But I think now we are there, and universal acceptance is one part of it. And the issue that, Manju, you come across is that yes, the registries have been, I'm sure the .tw domain is actually, has both the simplified Chinese and the traditional Chinese, because whether it's the .Asia and many of the Chinese top-level domain registries, when you register second level traditional Chinese, you will get the simplified Chinese as well. However, that doesn't mean the web hosting provider knows about it. What you're seeing is the situation, the registry and the registrar probably, the name is with manga. The name is probably with them. However, the web hosting provider did not turn it on. And that's also part of the universal acceptance issues. And now that we're done with the policies, the technology, I think the universal acceptance work is the next big step.
Thank you, Edmon. And then Kenny, as you said right now, TW, so in the CC, you already have 2 names for Taiwan. So can you share what is the current practice?
Okay, just try to echo what Manju just discussed, because in her experience in her life only see one traditional Chinese character for domain name. So that means the domain name registration actually are very selected and very few registration in .tw. And go back to Edmon just mentioned, actually we spent probably 4 or 5 years in IETF, try to convince the technical community. That was very tremendous, very important job. And eventually we passed the IETF standard. Then we spent another 10 years to try to convince the ICANN community. That will be tremendous, important, very critical. It's very, very universal. We should taking care for the minority group of people. That would spend 10 years. Then probably stay another 10 years for universal acceptance, say to convince them the username part will be very important. They need to send an email. So I think that's a little bit ridiculous. And taking the registration in a situation in TW, we probably have probably dozens thousand traditional Chinese registration under the second level of .tw. And so in terms of that kind of size, that kind of domain under administration, that's a very, very small proportion of the registration. Not to mention, probably pretty much of them as occupied by some sort of government agency, or probably occupied by university or some school. They just occupy for free registration. So you can consider from registry or registrar point of view, it doesn't make sense to provide that kind of service for free. And unless market really consider that will be very critical service for them. So in return, I will put it different way. We will consider, because that's a service oriented, we need to consider from end user point of view, are they really accept that kind of product or service? And that market to decide whether we should determine or we should continue to make a forward for that kind of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny, and all for the very insightful. So I guess the next question is, so right now, if the next step is to have the variant TLDs, do you see any change what's going to happen? And what would be the change in the system perhaps for the ISP, for example, to now have to be able to handle the variant across the TLDs? So maybe this time I'm starting from Kenny first and come back.
For the top level domain will be definitely compared to the second level domain name. That's a different consideration, because that will be a scaling resource, because everything need to compete at the root zone. So that was very, very selected resource. And for second level domain registration, you probably spend less than $10, you can get one domain name. But you wouldn't spend $10 for the top level domain name. You probably take a $300,000 US as a starting point to get a domain name. So that definitely need to be justified from investment point of view. And that kind of justification probably not only to provide service to the end user, probably need to consider from branding point of view, from intellectual property consideration, from sovereignty point of view, instead of from consumer service point of view. I think from different angle, they have different purpose. Thank you.
Kenny, Edmon?
Yeah, so I think, especially with IDN variants, the possibility for doing it in the top level is very important. I understand that, in fact, I'm intimately involved in one of the Chinese top level GTLDs, 点网站, and we can't seriously promote it here in Taiwan because it's in the simplified form. And we cannot promote it in Hong Kong either, and many other places. And it's basically not commercially viable without the IDN variants. So I think that's going to be an important part. And if coming from Hong Kong, we can see very clearly. I mean, having a Chinese domain name, both in traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese, is very important, especially with the mainland Chinese tourists coming to Hong Kong, right? They come to Taiwan too, so don't forget. And so I think that's going to main difference. But the bigger, I guess, the bigger trend is on universal acceptance, because the more people become aware of the need to deal with Chinese domain names, to deal with simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, the better the hosting platforms, the better the other platforms will be. And I think in order to do that, right now the market is not quite there, but I believe that policy and government intervention will help. As Kenny mentioned, many of the Chinese domain names are currently, government activities. Well, government has lots of other activities, procurement, events, large events, not only movies. I mean, government run a lot of large events. Why aren't they promoting the events in a Chinese domain name? And that is going to change when we have, I believe, more capability on IDN variant TLDs.
Thank you, Edmon. Manju, want to add anything on that?
It's very hard to add anything on those two because, they've exhausted every point. But I guess just when they all said the good things, I always play the devil's advocate, right? I feel like for Chinese, especially in Taiwan, traditional Chinese speakers, do we really want a top-level domain that's both in simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese? I probably would prefer just only traditional Chinese. I wouldn't care less if the Chinese tourists not coming to Taiwan, right? But that's my personal perspective. And also, so I think in Taiwan, most people care more about being globalized, being, entering the global markets. If they're aiming at this angle with their business, what's the use of Chinese, especially traditional Chinese TLD? Because the Taiwan's market is just that size. We have how many people? We have like 20-something million, right? They want a global market. If they want a global market, do they really need a Chinese domain names for their website? Probably not. Probably, if you see the most famous recent Taiwanese brand, they brand themselves as English, in a sense, Go-Go-Ro. They don't even have a Chinese brand name. Do they need a Chinese brand name for their TLD? Probably not. So that's why I always say it's a very good idea. I just don't see how it can work.
Yeah, sure, okay.
I quickly respond. Don't forget that Dian Taiwan, the Thai, also has a variant, even in simple traditional Chinese. So IDN variants is not only about traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese.
Yep, very good point, Edmon. And okay, so I have to wrap up this topic. Sorry, it's take a bit of a while, but hopefully on the floor, I think you've seen different points of view on this topic. And if you're interested, because this is a very topic that very relevant to Chinese speakers or Chinese users. So think about it. If you see the business case, that's something to prepare for the next round. All right, and then let's move on to the next topic. So another thing that's very specific to the Chinese market per se is the single character TLDs. So in the recommendation, in a very brief summary, is for the other scripts, this is not allowed. Because if you can see on this example, normally we need some context to recognize what is the name, what is the script of this for. If you just see just one letter, you don't know what actually it is, and it's not from a word. But then that situation is different from for Chinese character per se. So this recommendation, they said this is only allowed if it is the ideogram script, which is for now is only Han script. So for example, like this one, only one letter, there's a whole meanings to it, and it's possible to be a name or the brand to use for the new GTLD. So continue on this, what we are working on after that recommendation for the next round is there's a working group for IDN EPDP come to look deeper into this issue, and they issued a recommendation that at this time, only the Han script will be into that category of the ideogram. And there are two more points. The second point is, even though this is allowed, if there is any additional guidelines from the Chinese, Korean, Japanese community to consider this single character, that should be implemented. Or otherwise, the last point is, if there is no additional guideline needed and only the Luzon LGR already works, then that can be also another option as well. So as the current status, right now, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean script communities, they actually discussed this topic for a few times last year. And the Chinese community summarized that only the rules in the rules on LG are already sufficient. So is perhaps no need further guidelines. And for that, the Japanese and Korean community doesn't have any objection to that. So this is the current status right now. And I guess the next question would be just in general, for the panel perspective, do you see, is there any potential usage for the single character TLD for the Chinese community? So maybe I'll start from Edmon this time. Thank you.
Certainly. This is one of my favorite topics. Again, I used the term before, second-class citizen. I think that without single character Chinese TLDs, Chinese domains are second-class citizen. English TLDs can be one-word TLDs, whereas Chinese TLDs has only been allowed in at least 2 characters or more. You can call it a phrase, but it's one word. And Pitinan, you gave a good example. There are plenty other playful examples, right? Domain names, of course, you can do serious business and serious companies building on a particular domain as an identity, but there could be fun projects as well. Look at abc.xyz, right? There are fun parts of domain and identity that people can use for particular projects and particular particular initiatives with single character TLDs. And as everyone knows that the shorter domain, easier to type and easier to use. So some people, again, this took a lot of time. In fact, both this issue and the IDN variant issue was talked about roughly the same time, especially between 2006 and 2011. I worked very clear, very much on these 2 issues. I'm really glad that this is finally happening, and I think it opens up a whole new opportunity for playful use as well as useful short domain names that Chinese can use now.
Thank you, Edmon. Manju, you like to?
So I like for general IDNs, I'm skeptical, but so recently I've been following the Chinese online discussions, and echoing Edmon's playful cases, I think actually there's one character I think it's gonna be a very good TLD. So in the Chinese discussion online, we are using a lot of this single character, which is true. True in Chinese, it means touch, but they type in true as in true in English. So they're actually using true, but as touch in Chinese, but they mean it as true in English. So it's a fun, very fun pun that Chinese communities are using. And if you see, well, if you're Chinese, if you don't, then sorry for you. But if you read Chinese and you walk on the streets and you watch like the brand, the 招牌, like for stores, and you will see a lot of like the puns Taiwanese like to use. Taiwanese really love puns. And they don't only use puns in Chinese, they incorporate Japanese and English in the puns. So something, you have to read it out to understand how it means. So that is definitely, I think, one of the playful case Taiwanese will be interested in developing because that's what we love. Thank you.
Thank you, Manju and Kenny.
I think for single character top-level domain, definitely because that's a scarcity of resources. That kind of scarcity of resources has exclusive rights. So definitely easier to get more attention from the capital market, just like a Bitcoin. Because of the scarcity, so I believe the single character top-level domain, no matter what it is, I saw the example like the file. As long as ICANN willing to release the file, only allow people to register the file, the single character definitely will just go viral because the capture the market attention and people willing to invest that kind of scarcity. So, yes, from this point of view, I will fully support for a single character top level domain. And can you switch it back to the previous slide? I think the description for the previous slide is already a little bit out of dated because from CGP point of view, put in my head as a co-chair of CGP. CGP point of view, basically we are fully support for a single character top-level domain from Chinese registration. And JGP and KGP also, they are happy with the proposal, so they don't have any objection regarding to the proposal that raised by CGP. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. And I think we are run out of time. So for the next question, actually I will skip, but I just wanted to raise that all this position that Kenny just shared, the Chinese, Japanese, Korean community or generation panels, they will publish this position document for the public comment. Just to, so basically it will say that the rules in the rules on LGR for Chinese character is already sufficient. So if you see there is any additional guidelines needed, or if you support their decision, please participate in the public comment. And I would advertise through the TWNIC channel as well. All right, I think we are out of time, but if any of you have any question, I think we have, maybe can take 1 or 2 questions. Please go ahead.
So I don't have a question, but I do have 2 quick interventions. By the way, I'm Chen from ICANN. We actually do have an IDN website for this event as well, so I guess that makes 2. It's 网路治理交流论坛点台湾, yeah. So thanks to TWNIC for reserving that for us. I do agree with the issues that you all discussed, but it is a starting point. So hopefully from here, we can all work together as a community to kind of move this ahead and hopefully enhance the usage of IDN. And then the second intervention that I had was on back to the variant thing, because you guys were discussing about use in Taiwan, Hong Kong, China. Don't forget the Chinese-speaking community outside of this. So as a Malaysian who speaks Chinese, if I just imagine if I want to hold a business and I want to target all 3 economies that you mentioned, it would be actually a good thing to have the variants. So that's my intervention. Thanks.
Thank you, Yan-Chin. Xing, please go ahead. Oh, sorry. Okay. Please go ahead.
Speaking. Okay. Personally, I support everything you've just shared, but wearing my BC hat. BC has strong concern on the introduction of the variant at the top level. We've shared our concern in the comments, but very briefly is that because of the concern over the string similarity issue, in particular the singular plural things, that's still a kind of a debate. So rolling out the variant at the top level, not only the concern of the costs that we didn't talk here, but also the confusion among the business community is still very strong. So I'd like to just to remind you all about that. And also on the issue of the single character, I believe that we remain very neutral on this, but I think the BC just doesn't understand the issue is kind of being wrapped inside this IDN EPDP is not being a kind of a standalone subject to be discussed. So we would like to have it like more like being discussed among the community before it gets rolled out. But personally, like Kenny just said, I mean, in the capital market, I think that's very exciting. But just like to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of you want to respond?
So for the single character one, it was discussed within the IDN EPDP because within the sub-pro, it was the same set of recommendations. And I think it's, I wouldn't say it's, well, I think, so the BC has representative on the working group. We don't see he or her often. So if she or him has been actively involved, then probably it wouldn't be an issue that you're raising now. So I would definitely advocate for more involvement in the policy development process rather than not participating and come to the end and be like, oh, we didn't like this. Thank you.
Let me give it a more positive sense. I'm more than happy to speak to the BC at any time at your next meeting. between now and Rwanda or in Rwanda, more than happy to take the time. I think it's important to talk through the issues. I think some of you mentioned one particular issue, which is obviously the Quebec E with the accent or without the accent, or Cafe E with the accent and without the accent. Interestingly, the Latin script or the English script community or the European script community decided that the E and the E with the accent are not variants. So, but some community members now, especially from the business community, felt that it should be. So yeah, it took us 10 years. It's not perfect, maybe, but we need to go back to why the linguistic experts decided that they're not a variant, whereas the Thai and the two Thais in the Taiwan could be variants. So yeah, that's a separate discussion, but the general policy, hopefully, we can talk to the BC and make them feel that the overall policy for the variants, for the single characters are important. But there are details that maybe need revision, maybe need looking at again.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so maybe just very quickly, 15 seconds for each of the panels to do the closing remark. So maybe Kenny, can I start from you?
Okay, thank you. It's very happy to see all the variant issues have been all resolved, and we can move to the official business for ICANN. So I hopefully that for the next round, everything will follow the schedule and follow the all the IDN guideline and all follow the same procedure. And for any potential dispute, don't forget we still have UDRP, rapid suspension process. So don't worry about the dispute issue. Thank you.
So one thing I want to close with is that we spent a lot of effort, the Chinese community and the global community who are not speaking English as their first language, spent a lot of effort over the last 25 years to make this happen. We're there. So let's make it actually usable on the internet, and that's universal acceptance. That requires the government, the technology providers, and end users to be aware and to push for it to actually happen. And the next few years is going to be, in my mind, is going to we can make a big difference in making a multilingual internet come true.
So I guess I'll end with the slogan. Have been saying IDN is good. IDN has been a good idea. It has stayed as an idea, but I guess starting from now, let's make it a good reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Edmon. Thank you, Manju. So, and thank you for your attention. So with this, I think we can conclude the session.
Thank you all. Okay, let's give them a big round of applause for conducting such an interesting conversations.